Lightning round, question 1. The eigenvariety of these constructs correspond to their eigenvalues, and operations that can be done on these objects include the dot product and the cross product. For 10 points, what are these mathematical objects that have both a magnitude and a direction? Answer is vectors. Question 2. Lif and Lithorzir will be the only humans to survive this event, for they will be hiding within Hodmamir's forest. For 10 points, what is this event that begins with Fimbulvitr that is also known as the Twilight of the Gods in Norse mythology? Answer is Ragnarok. Question 3. This man has been proven to be the son of Amenhotep IV, and during his reign, the capital was moved back to Thebes. For 10 points, who is this pharaoh that reinstated the polytheistic Egyptian religion that died at the age of 18? The answer is King Tutankhamun. Question 4. This author wrote The Diary of a Superfluous Man and a Sportsman's Sketches, and his most famous work features Arkady Kirsanov and the nihilist Bazarov. For 10 points, name this Russian author of Fathers and Sons. The answer is Ivan Turgenev. Question 5. This month is ended by a 3-day festivity of feasting called Eid al-Fitr, and it begins with Hilal, a new moon. For 10 points, what is this month of Psalm in which no eating or drinking is allowed from dawn until dusk, and is the holiest month of Islam? The answer is Ramadan. Question 6. This man led the Dandi Salt March as a part of the campaign of non-violent protesting against British salt monopoly in India. For 10 points, name this figure who was influenced by Thoreau's civil disobedience and pioneered Satyagraha while opposing British rule in India. The answer is Mohandas Gandhi. Question 7. Traditionally, the tanto was used for this action, and Yukio Mishima notably committed this action after a failed coup d'etat. For 10 points, name this form of ritualistic suicide by disembowelment that is part of the samurai Bushido code. The answer is seppuku. Question 8. This artist pioneered an art form that was exemplified by his fountain. For 10 points, name this artist of found art, as well as Nude Descending a Staircase No. 2, who notably painted a mustache on the Mona Lisa and called it LHOOQ. The answer is Marcel Duchamp. Question 9. Aside from being associated with freedom of speech, the main goal of this policy was to circumvent the narrow cycle of apparatchiks in the Soviet Union. For 10 points, identify this policy of openness introduced by Mikhail Gorbachev along with perestroika. The answer is glasnost. Question 10. This anthropologist disproved the universality of the Oedipus complex in his Sex and Repression in Savage Society. For 10 points, name this anthropologist who studied the Trobriand Islanders in his Coral Gardens and Their Magic and Argonauts of the Western Pacific. The answer is Bronislaw Malinowski. Tossup and Bonus Round. This author wrote a play about Arnulf's wish to marry Agnes despite her love for Horace called The School for Wives. He also wrote a work about the desire of the children of Harpagon to escape his tyrannical ways. This author of The Miser also wrote a work about the foolishness of Monsieur Jordan. In another of his works, a character hides under a table to hear incriminating evidence against a guest. That guest, the titular character, is staying in the house of Organ and tries to seduce his wife Elmire. For 10 points, name this French playwright of the plays The Bourgeois Gentleman and Tartuffe. The answer is Molière. And for 5 extra points, Molière was part of the court of what French king, who was known as the Sun King? The answer is Louis XIV. Question 2. This organic compound is deoxygenated to an alkane with tributylatin hydride in the Barton-McCombry deoxygenation. The Chugayev elimination is a reaction that involves the elimination of water from this group to form alkenes, and Grignard reagents react with carbonyl groups to the secondary and tertiary varieties of this organic compound. The Fischer esterification occurs by refluxing a carboxylic acid and this group in the presence of an acid catalyst. For 10 points, what is this functional group in which a hydroxyl group is bound to a carbon atom? The answer is alcohol. For 5 extra points, what is this type of alcohol that is used as a fuel and is found in alcoholic beverages? The answer is ethanol. Question 3. This entity is partially made up of a construct that was coined by Wilhelm Steckel that attempts to explain why people reenact traumatic events. That construct, called the death drive, explains the repetition compulsion and leads toward death and a return to the inorganic. This entity is governed by a concept that is counterpart to another concept that allows for enduring pain when reality requires, called the reality principle. This psychological construct is unconscious and instinctual and acts according to the pleasure principle. For 10 points, name this psychological entity proposed by Sigmund Freud that encompasses the libido. The answer is the id. And for 5 extra points, name the psychological entity that opposes the id in that it seeks to achieve pleasure rationally and realistically. The answer is the ego. Question 4. A circular sheet of zinc sulfide was used in this experiment as a detector when it was collided with other particles. The radioactive decay of radium led to a beam of those particles that are also produced in the uncommon ternary fission. This experiment disproved the theory of atomic structure proposed by J.J. Thomson by firing a beam of alpha particles at a very thin sheet of metal and finding that most of the alpha particles passed through while many were repelled at very high angles. For 10 points, name this experiment that disproved the plum pudding model in favor of the atomic nucleus model. The answer is the gold foil or Rutherford experiment. For 5 extra points, the gold foil experiment was performed by Ernest Marsden and this other man, the inventor of a namesake counter for radiation. The answer is Hans Geiger. Question 5. This author wrote Apology for Smectymnus as the final of his 5 antiprolactical tracts, which criticized the episcopal form of church leadership. He also wrote a work in which the attendant spirit summons the water nymph Cymbrina to save the lady, and a pamphlet arguing against censorship. In addition to the masque Comus and the tract Areopagitica, this author wrote L'Allegro and Il Penseroso, as well as the poem that coined the phrase, "Look homeward, angel, now," and was an elegy for Edward King. This author's most famous work deals with the fall of man. For 10 points, name this British author of Lycidas and Paradise Lost. The answer is John Milton. For 5 extra points, John Milton was an official serving under what man who served as Lord Protector of England during the Commonwealth? The answer is Oliver Cromwell. Question 6. Under this political party, the first female was appointed into the British cabinet, and the first prime minister of this political party encountered the Zinoviev letter controversy. In addition to Ramsay MacDonald, another prime minister of this party founded the National Health Service under Aneurin Bevan. Other prime ministers of this party include Clement Attlee and Harold Wilson, and the most recent to be elected made an agreement with his predecessor, which is known as the Granita Pact. For 10 points, name this British political party of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. The answer is Labour Party. For 5 extra points, name this British political party of David Cameron that opposes the Labour Party. The answer is Conservative Party. Question 7. One character in this novel is a protege of Madame Stahl and meets another character at a German spa. Another has an affair with a ballerina as well as his French governess, which his wife Dolly forgives, and the horse Frou-Frou trips in a race against Gladiator. The wedding suit of one of the protagonists is missing its shirt, and that character marries Kitty. In addition to focusing on Konstantin Levin, this novel focuses on a character who repeatedly requests divorce from her husband Alexei. For 10 points, name this work about the title character who loves Count Vronsky and throws herself under a train, a work by Leo Tolstoy. The answer is Anna Karenina. For 5 extra points, name this novella by Leo Tolstoy that is about the life and death of the title character who dies from an injury sustained while hanging curtains. The answer is Death of Ivan Ilyich. Question 8. This composer included the Bach motif in his Fantasy on Fugue on the theme BACH. He wrote a set of 3 piano solos known as Liebestraum or Dreams of Love, and he composed 13 symphonic poems that include his Les Préludes. He wrote a symphony in 3 parts about a famous character of Goethe, and he composed a group of pieces whose 4th work may be replaced by his Bagatelle without tonality. In addition to the Faust Symphony and the Mephisto Waltzes, this composer wrote the Transcendental Etudes. For 10 points, name this composer of the Hungarian Rhapsodies. The answer is Franz Liszt. For 5 extra points, Liszt also composed Totentanz, which was based on what piece of music thought to be written by Thomas of Solano, that is Latin for Days of Wrath. The answer is Dies Irae. Question 9. Early on this battle, John Reynolds, who commanded troops on Willoughby Run and McPherson Ridge, was killed and replaced by Winfield Hancock. Ewell's 2nd Corps failed to take Cemetery Hill as night fell on the first day of this battle. The second day of this battle saw skirmishing in the wheat field and peach orchard, as well as in Devil's Den. Later in the day, Joshua Chamberlain led the 20th Maine in a bayonet charge to defend Little Round Top. For 10 points, what was this major turning point of the Civil War that was the bloodiest battle ever fought on American soil and was followed by a namesake address by Abraham Lincoln? The answer is the Battle of Gettysburg. For 5 extra points, name this other really bloody Civil War battle that was fought near Sharpsburg, Maryland. The answer is the Battle of Antietam. Question 10. Around this figure's neck hangs Vanamala, a garland of flowers, and the Kaustuba jewel, which is the 4th Ratna. This god turned into a turtle during the churning of the ocean, and he saved Manu by warning him of a flood in the form of a fish. In addition to Kurma and Matsya, he also appeared as Kalki, Vamana, and Vihara. This god rides the birdman Garuda, and he is depicted as four-armed, holding a lotus, mace, conch, and chakra. His consort was the goddess of wealth and beauty, Lakshmi. For 10 points, name this member of the Hindu Trimurti, the preserver god who had many forms known as avatars. The answer is Vishnu. For 5 extra points, name this other member of the Hindu Trimurti who is the destroyer god. The answer is Shiva. Supertossups. Question 1. In pheochromocytoma patients, this hormone can reach levels of 1,000 to 10,000 nanograms per liter. This hormone may be synthesized by the reaction of catechol with chloroacetyl chloride, followed by the reaction with methylamine to give the ketone, which is reduced to the desired hydroxy compound. Dopamine is oxidized to produce norepinephrine, which is then methylated to give this hormone. This hormone acts by binding itself to a class of metabotropic G protein coupled receptors that are the target of catecholamines. Those receptors, known as adrenergic receptors, allow for this hormone to trigger a number of metabolic changes. Among those processes is the stimulation of glycolysis in muscle. For 10 points, what is this hormone that increases heart rate, constricts blood vessels, dilates air passages, and participates in the flight or fight response? The answer is adrenaline. Question 2. This author wrote a poem about the abduction of the daughter of Prince Vladimir by an evil wizard, Ruslan and Ludmila. He also wrote a short story that sees Maria Gavrilovna marry the wrong man during the titular storm, only to come to love that man years after her first love dies, the blizzard. This author wrote a poem that sees the Never River tossing and turning like a sick man in his troubled bed. That work sees the titular object, the statue of Peter the Great, come to life. This author of The Bronze Horseman wrote a play where the title character contrives the death of the Tsar's brother Dmitri. He also wrote a novel about the title character's eventual love for Tatiana. For 10 points, name this Russian author of Boris Godunov and Eugene Onegin. The answer is Alexander Pushkin. Question 3. A graph of aggregate demand versus the rise of national output is known as this man's namesake cross. This economist wrote a work in which he used the example of taking an umbrella in case of rain to express his idea of irreducible uncertainty. That work is his Treatise on Probability. This man also wrote a work that proposed a monetary system that would later be suggested by the Bretton Woods Agreement. That work is a response to the Treaty of Versailles that the author called Carthaginian Peace. This writer of The Economic Consequences of Peace also wrote a work that introduced the consumption function, the multiplier, and effective demand, which created the framework for modern macroeconomics. For 10 points, name this economist who wrote The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money. The answer is John Maynard Keynes. Question 4. This author of the short story Youth also wrote another short story that sees a man named Legat swim onto another ship from the Sephora. Aside from writing The Secret Sharer, this author wrote a novel about a man who, aside from being the titular character, is a businessman named Mr. Verloc in The Secret Agent. He also wrote a novel set in the fictitious Costaguana that features Senor Gould, an owner of a mining concession in Sulaco, so when the town comes under attack, he trusts his silver to the title character in Nostromo. This author wrote about a first mate on the Patna, a ship full of pilgrims traveling to Mecca, and another of his works is about Marlowe's journey up the Congo to find a man named Kurtz. For 10 points, name this author of Lord Jim and Heart of Darkness. The answer is Joseph Conrad. Question 5. The cult at Mendez worship a ram god called Benebjejet that is described by the Book of the Heavenly Cow to be the Ba of this figure. This god is ruler over the fields of Eru, and he reigns over the people that are not eaten by the demon Amit. This god was found dead, embedded in a tree trunk that was holding up the roof of a palace in Byblos. Depicted with green skin and carrying a crook and flail, this eldest son of Geb and Nut was resurrected in thanks to his wife and Nephthys, the wife of his rival. That rival had previously killed this god and chopped him up into 14 pieces, and was also his brother Set, who had wished to take this god's throne. While dead, he conceived a son that would later avenge his death. For 10 points, name this father of Horus and the husband of Isis, the Egyptian god of the underworld. The answer is Osiris. Question 6. This composer wrote an opera in which Gualtiero takes back the title character as a wife in an opera based on the Decameron called Griselda. He also composed pieces for 1, 2, and 4 violins in l'estro armonico, as well as a set of 12 concertos for basso continuo, strings, and violin in l'Stravaganza. Works by this composer are denoted by the Reihn for Zeitness number, and his Mandolin Concerto in C major is quite often paired with a more famous work by this composer that comes from the collection of Concerto Grossi, the contest between harmony and invention. His most famous work features themes such as The Drunkards Have Fallen Asleep and Dogs Barking, and each are paired with a sonnet. For 10 points, name this composer who composed L'Inverno, L'Autunno, and La Primavera in The Four Seasons. The answer is Antonio Vivaldi. Question 7. Aside from translating Roman de la Rose, this author wrote a scientific work describing and instructing how to use the tidal tool in Treatise on the Astrolabe. He also wrote a work about a queen of Armenia complaining about the wooing of a false character from Thebes. In addition to Annalita and Arcite, this man wrote a work to commemorate the death of Blanche of Lancaster and represents her husband, John of Gaunt, as a man in black. He also wrote a work in which the narrator is led by Scipio Africanus through a temple of Venus. This author of the Book of the Duchess and Parliament of Fowls wrote a work that contains a part about Nicholas and Alison's prank on Absalom, and another about Arcite and Palamon's love for Emily. For 10 points, name this British poet who wrote about a pilgrimage to Thomas Becket's tomb in the Canterbury Tales. The answer is Geoffrey Chaucer. Question 8. This man wrote the essay Letter to Monsieur d'Alembert on Spectacles in response to an article published in Encyclopédie. This thinker wrote that the colder climates of the north had stripped language of its compassion, distorting it to a rational form. That work, Essay on the Origins of Language, was meant to be part of another work which describes the first man to claim an enclosed plot of land. In addition to Discourse on Inequality, this man wrote a novel in which Saint-Preux loves the new Heloise and Julie, and he wrote a treatise about the education of the titular boy in Emile. In another work, this thinker wrote that the sovereign must represent the general will and consist of the whole population, and that work argues that man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. For 10 points, name this French Enlightenment philosopher who wrote The Social Contract. The answer is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Question 9. One variety of this mineral is sometimes known as plasma or bloodstone, while another variety is often mistaken for banded calcite. Both heliotrope and onyx are formed when this mineral forms intergrowths with its mogonite, known as chalcedony, and stishovite and cypherite are denser polymorphs of this mineral that are formed by meteorite impacts. This mineral has a topaz-like variety known as citrine, which is an example of its macrocrystalline variety, and it is slightly less common than feldspar in the Earth's crust. This mineral's piezoelectric properties, discovered by Jacques and Pierre Curie, enable it to be used as a crystal oscillator found in many clocks and watches. For 10 points, what is this mineral crystal clear in its pure form that is the second most abundant mineral in the Earth's crust and has a Mohs hardness of 7? The answer is quartz. And question 10, this man's first sculpture depicted a figure that had its head broken off at the neck and was entitled The Man with the Broken Nose. This sculptor of the Three Shades also created a memorial statue of the author of the Human Comedy, Honoré de Balzac, as well as a statue known as the Age of Bronze. This sculptor also created a monument for a town that was besieged in the 100 Years' War, and he sculpted a scene in the Divine Comedy with a piece that includes works such as The Old Courtesan and Paolo and Francesca. This sculptor of the Burghers of Calais and the Gates of Hell sculpted a work that sees two figures wrapped in each other's arms, and another work which depicts a man meditating with his hand under his chin. For 10 points, name this French sculptor of The Kiss and The Thinker. And the answer is Auguste Rodin.